The doctors told Mr. Thompson that his 3 little girls, Diana, Abigail, and Adrielle, only had a few days left to live, and when he finally walked into their bright dining room and saw what was happening there, a wonderful sight, it made him fall right onto his knees and cry big, happy tears, because Mr. Thompson hadn't cried in a very, very long time, not even when his first big toy company didn't work out. And not even when his dear wife, Catherine, went to be with the angels, but the day. That kind, Dr. Miller said. Mr. Thompson, your daughters probably only have about 2 weeks left. That day something inside him felt like it completely broke, like a favorite toy shattering into tiny pieces, because his sweet girls, Diana, Abigail, and Adrielle, all 7 years old and full of dreams, were slowly fading away, as a very mean sickness called leukemia had stolen everything from them, first their pretty hair, then all their bouncy energy, and even their fun childhood playtime, and now, worst of all, it was trying to take their very lives, which made Mr. Thompson stand sadly in the special hospital room inside their big Connecticut house, looking at his 3 tiny daughters lying in their beds, with little tubes in their arms and machines making soft beeping noises. Their breathing was so super quiet and shallow that he had to watch them super closely just to be sure they were still alive and not just dreaming. And he had spent millions and millions of dollars trying every single thing he could think of, but nothing, absolutely nothing, seemed to work, until little Adrielle, the smallest and sweetest of them all, slowly opened her eyes and whispered, "Daddy, am I going to die soon?" And Mr. Thompson's chest felt very, very tight and squeezed, so he knelt down beside her bed and said, "No, sweet baby, I promise your mama I would always protect you and keep you safe." But even as he said those comforting words, he knew deep down in his heart that it wasn't true, and he was slowly, sadly losing his precious girls, and the very next morning, the big house felt awfully quiet and sad, like everyone was at a funeral, because no one spoke a single word. The friendly cook stopped making the girls' favorite yummy meals, and the grown-up staff members whispered in quiet corners, because everyone in the house had completely given up hope. But then, a new person walked right in. A kind young woman named Brenda Evans, who was 29 years old, and she didn't have any fancy medical degrees or important papers, just a quiet, strong look in her eyes, and Mrs. Davis, the bossy head housekeeper, looked her up and down and said, "So, you're here for the job, honey? Well, trained nurses don't even last 2 days in this house, because this house feels like it's just waiting for death to arrive." But Brenda's voice was very calm and steady as she replied, "Then maybe this house needs someone who isn't waiting for death." And when Mr. Thompson first saw her, he barely even looked up, just grumbled, "The medical room is off limits, my daughters need peace and quiet." But Brenda didn't move an inch and said, "Mr. Thompson, dying children don't need quiet, they need someone who still believes they are worth saving." And Mr. Thompson's head snapped up super fast, with a flash of anger in his eyes as he asked, "What did you just say?" And Brenda bravely answered, "Your daughters don't need another person treating them like invisible ghosts, they need someone who sees them as truly alive." And then there was a long, silent moment, as Mr. Thompson stared at this stranger who seemed to have nothing, no special reason to care, no fancy papers, and no logical explanation for what she was saying, but her eyes held a spark of something he hadn't seen in many, many months, a tiny flicker of hope, so he just muttered, "Do what you want, just stay out of my way." And Brenda quietly walked into the girls' room, which had 3 hospital beds, plain white walls, and smelled like yucky medicine and sadness. But she took off her gloves and gently touched Diana's face with her bare hand, and Diana's eyes slowly opened and she asked, "Who are you? Are you staying?" And Abigail stirred a little and asked, "Are you a nurse?" And Brenda sweetly replied, "No, sweethearts, I'm just someone who believes that tomorrow is definitely coming." And little Adrielle whispered, "Everyone treats us like we're already gone." But Brenda knelt beside her bed and said, "I don't see death when I look at you. I see 3 brave girls who still have lots of fight left inside them, and I am certainly not giving up on you." And that night she sang them a soft, gentle lullaby, and for the very first time in many months, the girls actually slept peacefully without any fear, and Brenda whispered into the darkness, a secret thought. I couldn't save you, my dear Naomi, but I promise I will save them. And God, who sees every tiny tear and hears every single prayer, was already starting to help. But Mr. Thompson had no idea that in just 3 days, everything would completely change. And as a little side note, before we continue this amazing story, remember to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where in the world you're watching from, because sometimes, when everything feels super hopeless and gloomy, that's exactly when magical miracles decide to walk right through your door. And if you've ever needed a reason to believe in wonders again, then you definitely need to keep watching this incredible tale, because the very next morning, Mr. Thompson woke up to a sound he hadn't heard in over a whole year, the sound of soft laughter, very faint and a little fragile, but totally real, and he sat straight up in his bed, his heart thumping like a drum. And for a moment, he thought he was just dreaming a beautiful dream, but then he heard it again, a gentle giggle coming from down the hallway. So he quickly put on his robe and walked straight toward the medical room, and the door was cracked open just a tiny bit, and inside, bright sunlight poured through the windows that had been covered with dark curtains for months and months, and Brenda was standing beside Diana's bed, holding a hairbrush like it was a microphone. And she was singing super badly on purpose, making silly noises, and Diana was smiling, actually smiling a real smile, and Abigail clapped her hands weakly from her bed, and even Adrielle's eyes were wide open, watching the funny show, and Mr. Thompson froze right in the doorway. And Brenda noticed him and stopped singing in the middle of her song, saying, "Good morning, Mr. Thompson." But he didn't answer. He just stared at his daughters, their faces still a little pale and their heads still bald. But something was wonderfully different. They looked awake and lively, and he asked, "What are you doing?" His voice coming out a little rougher than he meant it to, and Brenda gently set down the brush and said, "We're having breakfast, and the girls wanted some music." And Mr. Thompson's jaw tightened as he asked, "Music? They're supposed to be resting quietly." And Brenda calmly replied, "They've been resting for months, Mr. Thompson. Maybe it's time they start living a little." And Mr. Thompson opened his mouth to argue, but Diana spoke first, saying, "Daddy, Miss Brenda made us laugh." And his chest tightened again, because he hadn't heard Diana speak a full sentence in many, many weeks. So he just turned and left the room without saying another word, and over the next 2 days, the whole house started to feel different, like a cloud was lifting. Because Brenda didn't follow any old rules, she opened windows to let in fresh air, played cheerful music, and even brought beautiful flowers into the super clean medical room, and she sat with the girls for hours and hours, not looking at boring charts or giving them yucky medicine, just talking, telling fun stories, and listening carefully, and somehow, amazingly, the girls started responding. They ate more food, spoke more words, and even moved around more often. And Dr. Miller came for her usual weekly visit and quietly examined the girls, her forehead getting wrinkly with confusion, and she looked up at Mr. Thompson and said, "Leonard, I don't understand this at all." She was really puzzled. "Their important numbers are getting better, and their appetites are returning. This shouldn't be happening without any special treatments." And Mr. Thompson crossed his arms and said, "Then explain it to me." And Dr. Miller just replied, "I can't explain it." And she glanced toward the doorway where Brenda stood quietly folding blankets. "But whatever is happening, please don't stop it." And that night Mr. Thompson sat in his office, staring at medical reports that no longer made any sense, because the numbers still said his daughters were dying, but his own eyes told him something totally different, and he heard soft footsteps in the hall, and it was Brenda carrying a tray of empty teacups, and he called out, "Why are you doing this?" And she stopped and turned around, asking, "Doing what?" And he vaguely waved his hand and said, "This, the music, the stories, the hope. You know they're dying. Why give them false hope?" And Brenda's eyes softened kindly as she said, "It's not false hope, Mr. Thompson. It's just plain hope, and sometimes that's the only medicine that truly matters." And she walked away, leaving him all alone with his confusing doubts. But deep down inside, underneath his pride and his fear, Mr. Thompson felt something he hadn't felt in months and months, a tiny flicker of belief. and that scared him more than anything else in the world. And 3 days passed, and Brenda kept showing up every single morning at 7 o'clock, never late, never asking for permission, and she would walk into the medical room like she owned it, pulling back the curtains and letting the bright light flood in. And the other nurses didn't know what to think of her, because she wasn't mean or rude, she just existed in a way that made all the old rules feel small and silly. And Mr. Thompson watched her from a distance. He would stand in the hallway with his arms crossed, listening to her talk to his daughters like they had years and years ahead of them, like there was no scary sickness, no sad ending coming, and it made him feel a little angry. And one morning, he overheard her in the kitchen talking to Mrs. Davis, saying, "I need party supplies, balloons, streamers, and ingredients for a cake." And Mrs. Davis blinked slowly and asked, "Party supplies for what?" And Brenda simply said, "The girls turn 7 in 10 days, and we're definitely celebrating." And the room went completely silent, and Mrs. Davis's face turned pale as she said, "Miss Evans, those girls might not even make it to their birthday." But Brenda looked her straight in the eye and said, "Then we will make sure they do." And Mr. Thompson stepped into the kitchen, his voice like ice as he said, "What did you just say?" And Brenda turned, calm and unafraid, and repeated, "I said we're throwing them a birthday party." And Mr. Thompson's jaw clenched tightly as he said, "A birthday party? For children who might not even live to see it? Do you think that's kind? That's cruel." And Brenda replied, "No, Mr. Thompson, what's truly cruel is treating them like they're already gone." And Mr. Thompson started to say, "You don't know anything about." But Brenda cut him off, her voice cracking just a tiny bit. "I know what it's like to sit beside a hospital bed and watch someone you love slip away, and I know the difference between giving up and giving them something wonderful to hold on to." And Mr. Thompson stared at her, and for a moment, something flickered across his face, a hint of pain, of understanding, something raw and honest. Then he turned and walked right out of the room. But Brenda didn't stop. She ordered all the party supplies herself, paying with her own money, and started secretly planning the decorations. And the nurses whispered about her, and the staff thought she was a little crazy. But the girls, oh, the girls came alive. Diana asked what flavor the cake would be, Abigail wanted to wear a pretty dress, and even Adrielle, who barely had the strength to sit up, asked if there would be candles. And one afternoon, Brenda did something no one had ever dared to do. She put the girls in wheelchairs and took them outside into the fresh air, and Mr. Thompson saw it from his office window, his 3 daughters, bald and pale, wrapped in soft blankets, sitting in the beautiful garden for the very first time in months, with the warm sunlight on their faces, and Brenda kneeling beside them, pointing at colorful flowers, making them smile and giggle. And Mr. Thompson gripped the edge of his desk tightly, thinking, "This woman has no right, no special training, no reason to believe any of this will work." But his daughters were laughing, and he couldn't even remember the last time he had heard that wonderful sound, and he turned away from the window, his chest feeling very tight. "What are you doing to them?" he whispered to the empty room, but deep down, a part of him already knew the answer. She was giving them back their lives, and that meant he would have to face something he had been too afraid to give them himself. And on the 5th day, something truly amazing changed. Diana sat up on her own, not for a long time, maybe only 30 seconds, but she did it, with no help, no one even asking her to try. She just sat up by herself, and Brenda was reading to them when it happened. She paused in the middle of her sentence, watching Diana's small body straighten against the pillows. And Brenda whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "Look at you, my dear." And Diana smiled, a weak but real smile, and said, "I wanted to see the picture." And Abigail reached out and touched her sister's hand, saying, "You did it, Dee!" And even Adrielle turned her head, watching with wide, surprised eyes, and it was a small thing, so very small, but it was absolutely everything. And Dr. Miller came that afternoon for her scheduled checkup. She examined Diana quietly, then moved to Abigail, then Adrielle, and when she finished, she just stood there staring at her clipboard, and Mr. Thompson asked from the doorway, "What is it, doctor?" And Dr. Miller looked up, her face pale with surprise. "Their white blood cell counts are improving." And Mr. Thompson straightened up quickly. Improving? How much? And Dr. Miller replied, Enough that I had the lab run the tests twice. This doesn't happen, Mr. Thompson, not without active treatment, not with leukemia this aggressive. And Mr. Thompson asked, So, what are you saying? And Dr. Miller said, I'm saying I don't know. And she looked toward Brenda, who was quietly arranging flowers by the window. But something is definitely working. And Mr. Thompson followed her gaze. Brenda wasn't doing anything medical, she was just there. Present, steady, and Dr. Miller lowered her voice. Whatever's happening in this room, don't question it, just let it continue. And she left, and Mr. Thompson stood frozen, watching Brenda hum softly as she adjusted the vase, and that night, he couldn't sleep a wink. He walked the hallways, restless and confused, his mind spinning, because for weeks, he had thrown everything at this terrible sickness, money, science, the best doctors in the world, and a woman with no special papers was doing what none of them could, and he found himself standing outside the girl's room. The door cracked open a little, and inside, Brenda sat in the chair between the beds, knitting something small and blue, and Mr. Thompson's voice came out quieter than he intended as he asked, Why are you still here? It's past midnight. And Brenda didn't even look up. Because they sleep better when someone's close by. And Mr. Thompson said, The nurses can do that. And Brenda calmly replied, The nurses check important numbers, I'm just here. She glanced up at him. There's a big difference. And Mr. Thompson stepped inside. The room was dim, lit only by a small lamp, and his daughters slept peacefully, their breathing steady and quiet, and he had avoided this room for weeks because it hurt too much to see them like this. But now they looked different, not totally healed, but not dying either, and he said, You really think they're going to make it to their birthday? It wasn't really a question, and Brenda set down her knitting. I think they're fighting super hard, and as long as they're fighting, I am not giving up. And Mr. Thompson really looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time, and quietly asked, Who are you, Brenda? And Brenda's eyes held something deep, something a little broken and wonderfully beautiful all at once. Just someone who made a promise. She whispered softly, and Mr. Thompson wanted to ask more, but something in her voice stopped him. He turned to leave, then paused at the door, and said, Thank you. So quietly he wasn't sure she heard him, but when he glanced back, Brenda was smiling, and for the very first time in months, Mr. Thompson felt something he thought was gone forever, hope, and Mr. Thompson started to avoid the medical room. Again, not because he didn't care about his girls, but because he cared too much, because every time he walked past that door and heard his daughters laughing, actually laughing, it broke something inside him, something he had worked for years to build up, like control, distance, and the belief that showing emotions made you weak. He had spent his whole life believing that having lots of money and power could solve anything. But now a woman with nothing special was proving him completely wrong. And it bothered him a lot, and on the 7th day, he found Brenda in the kitchen writing a list. Balloons, streamers, rainbow cake ingredients. And he stood in the doorway watching her. She hadn't noticed him yet, and he said, You're really doing this? And Brenda looked up, no surprise, no fear, just that same calm look she always carried. Yes, she said, and Mr. Thompson's voice was harder than he meant it to be. They have less than a week left, you're setting them up for a big disappointment. And Brenda set down her pen. No, Mr. Thompson, I'm giving them something wonderful to look forward to. There's a big difference. And he asked, What if they don't make it? And Brenda simply asked, What if they do? And Mr. Thompson's jaw tightened. He stepped closer, his voice dropping low. You don't understand what it's like to watch someone you love slip away, to know you can't stop it. And Brenda's eyes flickered with something like pain, maybe, but she didn't look away. You're right, she said quietly. I don't understand what that's like. And the lie hung in the air between them. Mr. Thompson could feel it, but he didn't push her. I'm their father, he said. I know what's best for them. And Brenda bravely asked, Then why haven't you spent more than 5 minutes in their room this week? And the words hit him like a punch in the stomach, and Mr. Thompson stared at her, anger rising in his chest. How dare you say that? He fumed, and Brenda's voice was gentle but firm. "I'm not trying to hurt you, Mr. Thompson. I'm trying to help you see them, really see them, before it's too late." And Mr. Thompson's hands clenched into tight fists. He wanted to yell, to fire her, to throw her out of his house. But he couldn't, because deep down inside he knew she was right. So he turned and walked away without another word, and that afternoon, Brenda wheeled the girls out to the garden again, and Mr. Thompson watched from his office window. He told himself he was just checking, making sure they were safe, but really, he was watching the way Brenda knelt beside Adrielle, pointing at a beautiful butterfly, the way Diana reached out to gently touch a flower, the way Abigail tilted her face toward the warm sun, her eyes closed, smiling peacefully. "My daughters," he thought. "When was the last time I really looked at them? Not at their sickness, not at their monitors, but at them, my beautiful girls." And he pressed his hand against the glass, and below, Brenda glanced up, and for a moment, their eyes met across the distance. She didn't smile, didn't wave, just held his gaze, and in that look, Mr. Thompson saw something that truly terrified him. She wasn't just here to save his daughters, she was here to save him too, and he turned away from the window, his heart pounding hard, and outside, the girls laughed joyfully, and Mr. Thompson, the man who controlled billions of dollars, felt more powerless than he ever had in his entire life. And on the morning of day 9, Mr. Thompson woke to a scary silence, no laughter, no voices, and his chest tightened with fear. He threw on his robe and rushed down the hall, and the medical room door was wide open, and inside, the beds were empty, and panic hit him like ice water. "Where are they? Where are my daughters?" he cried out, and Mrs. Davis appeared in the hallway. "They're in the dining room, Mr. Thompson, with Miss Evans." And Mr. Thompson didn't wait, he walked super fast, his heart pounding like crazy, and when he reached the dining room, he stopped completely. The big table was covered with paper and colorful crayons, and Brenda sat right in the middle, surrounded by all 3 girls. They were drawing, making special birthday cards, and Diana held up her card, a wobbly rainbow. "Look, Daddy, for our party!" she exclaimed, and Abigail's card had pretty flowers. "Miss Brenda said we can each make one." And even Adrielle was coloring, her small hand moving slowly but carefully across the paper, and Mr. Thompson stood frozen in the doorway. "This room," he thought. "I locked it after Catherine died. I couldn't stand to look at it. Too many sad memories, too much pain." But now it was full of bright color, full of happy life, and Brenda looked up at him. "We needed more space, I hope that's okay." And Mr. Thompson couldn't speak, his throat was too tight with emotion, and Diana slid off her chair and walked toward him. She walked all by herself, and she took his hand. "Daddy, will you help me finish mine?" she asked, and he looked down at his daughter, her bald head, her pale skin, but her eyes, oh, her eyes were so bright and alive, and he nodded slowly, and sat down beside her, and Brenda handed him a crayon without a word, and they sat there for a whole hour. Mr. Thompson drew clumsy flowers beside Diana's rainbow, listened to Abigail talk about what pretty dress she wanted to wear, and watched Adrielle smile as she colored a sun, and somewhere in that hour, something wonderful inside him cracked open, and when the girls got tired, Brenda helped them back to their room for a rest, and Mr. Thompson stayed behind, staring at the drawings scattered across the table. And Brenda returned a few minutes later, and she started gathering the crayons, and Mr. Thompson said quietly, "My wife used to sit here, every Sunday morning, she'd make yummy pancakes, and the girls would draw pictures while we waited." Brenda stopped and listened intently. "After she died, I locked this room, couldn't face it." His voice broke with sadness. "I've been so afraid of losing them that I forgot to be their father." And Brenda sat down across from him. "It's not too late, is it?" she asked softly, and he looked at her, his eyes red and teary. "They're dying, Brenda, the doctors said so." And Brenda's voice was gentle but firm. "The doctors said a lot of things, but your daughters are still here, still fighting hard, and they need you right there in that fight with them." And Mr. Thompson covered his face with his hands. "I don't know how to do that," he said, and Brenda reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "You just show up," she whispered. "That's all, you just keep showing up." And Mr. Thompson looked at her through his tears, and for the first time since Catherine died, he let himself cry big, heaving sobs, and Brenda didn't move, didn't speak, just sat with him in his deep sadness. And outside, the wind moved softly through the trees, and inside, a father slowly began to heal, and the morning of their birthday finally arrived, and Mr. Thompson woke up very early. His heart felt heavy and a little sad. He had barely slept all night. Because 10 days ago, Dr. Miller had given them 2 weeks to live, and today was day 10, but his daughters were still alive and here, and he walked downstairs and stopped at the dining room door, and inside, Brenda had transformed everything beautifully. Colorful balloons hung from the ceiling, and streamers in every rainbow color covered the walls. The big table was set with plates and candles, and in the very center, a magnificent 6-layer rainbow cake, each layer a different bright color, and Mr. Thompson's breath caught in his throat. "What is all this?" His voice came out a little rough, and Brenda turned. She wore a simple dress, her hair pulled back neatly. "It's a birthday party, Mr. Thompson. Your daughters are 7 today." And he started to say, "They might not." But he stopped himself. He looked at the amazing cake, the cheerful decorations, the pure love poured into every single detail, and Brenda said softly, "They're here, that's what truly matters." And an hour later, the girls came downstairs. Diana wore a pretty blue dress, Abigail wore a sunny yellow one, and Adrielle wore a sweet pink dress. They were thin and bald, still so fragile, but they were smiling widely, and Mr. Thompson stood against the wall, his arms crossed, trying his best to hold himself together, and Mrs. Davis brought in the cake, with 7 small candles lit, flickering gently in the light, and the girls stood together, holding each other up, and Brenda said, "Make a wish, girls." And Diana looked at her sisters, then at Mr. Thompson. "Daddy, will you help us blow them out?" And Mr. Thompson's chest tightened again. He couldn't move, and Brenda's eyes met his across the room, gentle and steady, and he walked forward, knelt beside his daughters. "Ready?" Diana whispered, and Mr. Thompson just nodded. He couldn't speak a word, and they leaned in together, all 4 of them, and blew, and the candles went out, and the room erupted in happy applause. Mrs. Davis wiped tears from her face, and even the nurse standing quietly in the corner was crying, but Mr. Thompson didn't hear any of it. All he saw were his daughters, alive and laughing, here with him, and he pulled them close, all 3 of them, into a tight hug, and he finally broke down, deep. Sobs tore from his chest, a roaring sound of years and years of sadness pouring out. "I'm sorry," he choked. "I'm so sorry. I've been so afraid of losing you that I forgot to love you." And Diana wrapped her small arms around his neck. "It's okay, Daddy," she whispered, and Abigail pressed her face against his shoulder. "We love you." And Adrielle whispered, "Don't cry, Daddy, we're still here." And Mr. Thompson held them even tighter, his whole body shaking with emotion, and across the room, Brenda stood with her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face, because this moment, this impossible, beautiful moment, was everything she had fought so hard for, and Mr. Thompson looked up at her through his tears. "Thank you," he mouthed silently, and Brenda nodded, smiling through her own tears, and in that room, surrounded by colorful balloons and yummy cake and happy laughter, a father finally learned what he had been too broken and sad to see. His daughters didn't need him to magically save them, they just needed him to love them with all his heart, while there was still precious time. And that night Mr. Thompson didn't go back to his cold office. He stayed. He sat in the chair beside their beds, watching them sleep peacefully, their breathing steady, their faces calm, and for the first time in months, he wasn't afraid to be close to them. And Diana stirred a little, opened her eyes halfway. "Daddy?" she whispered. "I'm here, sweetheart," he replied, and she smiled. "You stay," she said softly. "I'm not going anywhere." His voice cracked with emotion. "Not anymore." And she closed her eyes again, her hand reaching for his, and he held it tightly, feeling how small and fragile it was. He had spent so much time running away, hiding in his office, making calls, trying to control things that couldn't be controlled. But Brenda was right, all they needed was him, present and here, and the very next morning, something wonderful shifted in the entire house. Mr. Thompson didn't retreat to his office. He had breakfast with the girls, sat with them while Brenda read exciting stories, helped them with their drawings. He was a little clumsy at first, didn't know what to say, how to just be a dad. But they didn't care at all. Diana asked him to help her color, Abigail wanted him to braid the wig she sometimes wore, and Adriel just wanted him to sit close, and Mr. Thompson did. And one afternoon, he found Brenda in the hallway folding blankets. "I owe you a big apology," he said quietly, and Brenda looked up. "For what?" she asked. "For fighting you? For not trusting you?" He paused. "For not seeing what you were really doing for us." And Brenda smiled softly. "You were protecting them, Mr. Thompson, that's all you knew how to do." And he said, his voice thick with gratitude, "You taught me something much better, you taught me how to truly love them." And Brenda's eyes filled with tears. She didn't speak, just nodded her head, and that evening, Mr. Thompson sat in the garden with the girls. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden light over everything. Abigail leaned against his shoulder, Diana played with a flower in her hand, and Adriel sat in his lap, quiet but totally content. "Daddy," Diana said, "are we going to be okay?" And Mr. Thompson's throat tightened. He wanted to lie, to promise them forever. But he had learned something important in the last 2 weeks. That truth wrapped in love was much better than false hope. "I don't know, sweetheart," he said gently. "But I know we're together, and that's what truly matters." And Diana thought about that for a moment, then nodded. "Okay," she said, and they sat in silence, watching the sky turn beautiful shades of pink and orange, and Mr. Thompson closed his eyes, felt the weight of his daughters against him, the warmth of the fading sun, and he whispered a prayer, something he hadn't done since Catherine died. "Please, if you're listening, God, give us more time." And the wind stirred the trees, and for a moment, everything felt still and sacred, like God was close enough to hear. But Mr. Thompson didn't know that in just 2 days everything would shatter again, but not in the way he feared, because 2 nights later, a terrible storm came. Winter hit Connecticut very hard, snow fell thick and fast, and the wind howled against the windows, rattling the glass loudly, and by evening, the power flickered once, twice. Then went out completely. The emergency generator kicked in, but the big house felt isolated, cut off from the whole world, and Mr. Thompson checked on the girls. They were sleeping soundly, and Brenda sat in the chair between their beds, knitting by lamplight. "Storm's getting worse," he said quietly, and Brenda nodded. "We'll be fine." But around midnight Adriel woke up with a very high fever, and Brenda felt her forehead. Her skin was burning hot. "Leonard!" she called, her voice calm but urgent, and he was there in seconds. "What's wrong?" he asked. "She's spiking a fever, we need to cool her down." And they worked together, using cold towels and ice. But Adriel's temperature kept climbing higher and higher, and her breathing became shallow and difficult, and Mr. Thompson grabbed his phone. No signal. He tried the landline, dead. "I'll drive to the hospital," he said, and Brenda's voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. "You won't make it 10 feet in this snow, it's too deep." And Adriel's lips started turning blue, and Diana and Abigail woke up, their eyes wide with fear. "What's wrong with Addie?" they cried, and Mr. Thompson knelt beside Adriel's bed. "Baby, stay with me, please stay with me." But her eyes were rolling back into her head, and her breathing stopped, and the monitor flatlined, making a long, terrifying sound. "No!" Mr. Thompson's voice broke. "No, no, no!" And Brenda pushed him gently aside. She tilted Adriel's head back and started chest compressions. Her hands moved super fast, counting under her breath. "Come on, sweetheart, come back." 30 seconds passed, then a minute, and Mr. Thompson grabbed Adriel's hand. "Please, baby, I just found you again, don't leave me, please." And Brenda kept going, tears streaming down her face, her voice cracking as she counted. "Breathe, baby, breathe, your daddy needs you, your sisters need you." 2 minutes passed, and Mr. Thompson collapsed, his forehead pressed against Adriel's chest. "God, please take me instead, please, not her." And Diana and Abigail were sobbing loudly. "Addie, wake up!" And Brenda's hands never stopped, but her voice broke. Not you too, Naomi!" She caught herself, gasped, and kept going. Come back, sweetheart, please come back. 3 minutes passed, then a small cough, weak but real, and Adrielle's eyes fluttered open, and Mr. Thompson's head shot up. She's breathing! Oh God, she's breathing! He pulled her into his arms, sobbing into her hair. You're here, you're still here! And Brenda collapsed back into the chair, her whole body shaking with exhaustion, and Mr. Thompson looked at her through his tears. You called her Naomi. Who is Naomi? He asked, and Brenda's face crumbled. She covered her mouth with her hand, tears pouring down. My daughter, she whispered. She was 6, leukemia, 5 years ago. And Mr. Thompson's breath caught. Oh God, Brenda! And Brenda's voice broke even more. I couldn't save her. I held her just like this, but she didn't come back. She looked at Adrielle, alive in Mr. Thompson's arms. I promised her that night I'd never let another child feel alone in the fight. And Mr. Thompson reached out and took Brenda's hand. You kept your promise, he whispered. You saved her, you saved all of us. And in that powerful moment, surrounded by the storm and darkness, they both truly understood something important. Healing wasn't just for the dying children, it was also for the living people who had forgotten how to truly live. And 5 years later, spring came early and brightly to Connecticut, and the Thompson estate looked wonderfully different now. The gardens were full of beautiful colors, roses, tulips, wild flowers everywhere. The windows stayed open wide, cheerful music played from somewhere inside, and laughter, always happy laughter, filled the air. And Diana, Abigail, and Adrielle, now 12 years old, ran through the green grass, their hair long and wild and flowing, their voices loud and free. No more hospital beds, no more beeping monitors, no more scary fear, just pure, happy life. And inside the kitchen, Brenda stood at the counter mixing yummy batter for a rainbow cake, and Mr. Thompson walked in, flour already on his shirt from helping earlier, and he smiled. They're asking when it's ready, he said, and Brenda laughed. Tell them patience is a virtue, my dear. And Mr. Thompson leaned against the counter, watching her work. You know, I never thanked you properly, he said, and Brenda looked up. For what? She asked. For saving my daughters, for saving me, he replied, and Brenda shook her head gently. I didn't save anyone, Leonard, I just reminded you all that love is much stronger than fear. And he was quiet for a moment, then he reached out and took her hand. You gave me my family back, you gave me myself back. And Brenda's eyes filled with tears. And you gave me a reason to keep my promise. And just then, the kitchen door burst open, and Diana, Abigail, and Adrielle rushed in, breathless and grinning widely. Is it ready yet? Diana asked eagerly. Almost, Brenda said, wiping her eyes quickly, and Adrielle, once the weakest little girl, now the loudest and most energetic, grabbed Mr. Thompson's hand. Dad, come outside! We want to show you something! And Mr. Thompson let them pull him toward the door. He glanced back at Brenda, and she smiled and nodded, and he followed his daughters into the garden, and they led him to a small tree they had planted last fall, and tied to one of the branches was a pretty ribbon, and hanging from the ribbon, a small wooden sign, and Mr. Thompson leaned closer, reading the carved letters. For Naomi, who taught us that love never dies, it just grows, and his throat tightened. With emotion, he looked at Brenda, who had followed them outside. They wanted to honor her, Brenda whispered. The girl who started it. All. And Mr. Thompson pulled his daughters close, all 3 of them into a warm hug. Then he reached out and pulled Brenda in too, and they stood there together, a family built not by blood, but by a powerful love that refused to ever quit. And above them, the sky was clear and blue, and somewhere far beyond the clouds, a little girl named Naomi was smiling, because her mother's love hadn't ended when she died. It had multiplied and spread to so many others, and that evening they gathered around the big table, and the rainbow cake sat in the center, candles lit, but this time, the candles were for Brenda. Happy birthday, Miss Brenda! The girls shouted excitedly, and Brenda covered her face, laughing and crying at the same time with happiness, and Mr. Thompson raised his glass. 5 years ago, Brenda, you walked into our lives when we had completely given up hope. You didn't bring medicine, you brought us hope. You didn't save us with fancy science, you saved us by teaching us how to truly live and love again. He looked at her, his eyes full of gratitude. To Brenda, the amazing woman who did the impossible. To Brenda. Everyone echoed cheerfully, and Brenda closed her eyes, made a wish deep in her heart, and blew out the candles, and when she opened her eyes she looked around the table at Diana's bright smile, Abigail's gentle eyes, Adrielle's fierce grin, and Mr. Thompson's grateful face, and this was her promise kept, this was her healing too, and later that night, after the girls had gone to bed and were sleeping soundly, Mr. Thompson and Brenda stood on the porch, watching the twinkling stars above. Do you think she sees this? Mr. Thompson asked quietly, referring to Naomi, and Brenda looked up at the sky. I know she does, she said softly, and Mr. Thompson took her hand. Thank you for not giving up on us, he whispered. Thank you for learning how to fight. Brenda whispered back, and they stood in comfortable silence, their hands clasped together, and somewhere between heaven and earth, love whispered back a quiet, joyful, well done.